Hi, I'm going to make a video about boundaries, about therapy, and about the Sabbath being made for man, not man for the Sabbath, which is Mark 2:27, what Jesus says in Mark 2:27. The institution of the Sabbath is there for humans. It's just from my experiences with working with people in therapy and spiritual direction, because I'm a spiritual director and also a therapist. And I also attend a church there's a lot of therapists in my church. That's one aspect of it I think is makes it a particularly enjoyable environment for me. I enjoy being with people who think in that way. And also I notice in more mainstream church, there's a kind of antipathy towards therapy. So that in the OCCA, which is the church I go to online, there is an idea of having a topic which is about therapy, and how do we need therapy when we have Jesus? With Jesus, do we really need therapy if we have Jesus? So that might be the topic of our next synod in 2026. And I've certainly encountered in some spheres of Christianity a sense of sort of a suspicion around therapy, which I think could fall into this category of it being quite diagnostic. I think that it might be some of the suspicion might be around how the diagnostic side of things, and it not necessarily feeling healthy in a way that it sort of gets in the way of God's work in us, that there might be other people say a therapist who's just sort of deciding what's the best way forward for a person, and like maybe taking some of that or getting in between the client and God, which I think does happen, and I think it's inadvertent. I don't think that's the intention of therapists normally, but I do think that happens. I think therapists can be quite opinionated and got quite a strong sense of, perhaps even though they want to really make space for the client, they can be imposing their opinions more than perhaps they even realise. I'm not sure why, but that seems to be a struggle for some therapists. And I find it quite upsetting to work with someone who's sharing their opinions and maybe has a sense of things in their own head already. And it's a conversation I had with someone about empathy, which I think might be quite an unhealthy thing in a way, because it can be quite subjective whether this is empathy or not. Someone's like trying to have an empathetic idea of what's going on for the other person. Well, actually, this is one reason why I really like IFS work, the internal family systems, because IFS really has a strong sense of not coming with preconceived ideas about what's going on in the other person. And it's a real therapy of accompaniment. And that's what I'm trained in. That's the level I'm trained in my therapy work, for the biodynamic massage work that I do, which is the first level of body psychotherapy, biodynamic psychotherapy training. It's more about accompaniment. We don't go into the diagnostic side of things, although I am embarking on that training now. I am training to be a body psychotherapist. But I think I want to continue to work in this accompaniment way. I don't want to be, even with all that, I don't want to be diagnosing. I don't want to be stepping ahead of the client and thinking what direction might be good for them. I really, really believe in a path of accompanying the client with God. And that's why I'm also very strongly trained in as a spiritual director as well. The Sabbath. It's something that we use, we take. We have to it has to be, it's there to hold us so that we can flourish and grow and sort of provide this fertile ground of well, whatever we need. And in the same way that the church is, it has to be about the human. The church has to be about the church community. There's nothing outside of the church community that's like some kind of ideal church. So another reason why I really enjoy the church I'm in and why I'm with this church. It's an inclusive church, and it develops its church, its bottom up, if you like, from the community. And I really believe strongly in that. I believe there's no bad parts. I believe we shouldn't leave one person behind, and that if we do, just like with the Good Samaritan, nothing else is worth doing. If we've walked past someone who's on the street been beaten up and they're not able to help themselves, they've been left robbed and naked, stripped of everything they have. If we walk past them on the street to get to our church service on time, so that because we're running the church service and then there's a whole congregation of people who won't be able to attend the church service if we don't go there on time, well, actually no, because we walk past love in order to get to that church service on time, so that it's at that point it's not worth going to anymore. Which is obviously is it 2 Corinthians, everything's like a clanging gong without love. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels but have no love, I am a noisy gong or clanging cymbal. 1 Corinthians 3, 1, 13. Yeah, so I feel like these are all central messages to what Jesus is teaching us, that come together. And when we're sitting opposite a person, working with them as a spiritual director or therapist, even as a doctor, possibly, although obviously there are places where we can definitely say, yes, that's a broken bone. So I don't want to get too much into that sort of medical side of things. But so much of the time, certainly, people don't necessarily need a diagnosis. They don't need to be told where to go and what to do. They need to have their parts listened to. Their parts need to be listened to, because we've all got all these we are a functioning system that just hasn't really had a sense of its own functionality. So the more that someone steps in as a therapist and shares their opinions about things, yes, it's an interaction. It's a human interaction, but for some people, it's quite hard to have time for the other person in the therapy room. It can be a place that's a space which is completely about the client for the first time in that client's life, possibly. In daily life, we're always hearing everyone's opinions all the time, and we're always in interaction. So obviously that's important, and it's important we have space for interaction. I mean, it's important we have space for the relationship that builds. But it's so important to be accompanied in ourselves, for us to accompany ourselves. And I think that's the real guidance that most of us need at this point in human history, is to listen to ourselves, listen to our parts that really have things to say and don't want to be told by somebody else what they're saying and need to discover it for themselves. So all the rules about boundaries, all the rules that therapy has about not imposing, not telling someone what to do, not jumping in and giving advice. These are all really, really important rules. Not jumping in with our preconceived ideas of how things are. And I think that's where sort of a more limited training helps in a way, because if you're told you haven't got the training to do that, so don't do it, then you don't do it. And then that's actually that's a humble place to come to meet the client from. Whereas if you're told, well, after 4 years of training, you can do it, perhaps actually that's less value to the client. The institution becomes more important than the man, than the human. But actually, it's just not true. It's the human that has the interaction, the relationship with God. It's not the institution. It's not the setup. It's not the rule book. The rule book changes and adapts and needs to change and adapt. And every situation is unique, and every single human being that goes through therapy brings our collective consciousness into a different place. Our collective human system, brings new information into that system. And so things have to change and adapt for that. So I wanted to speak about that because just how important it is to hold the space. I think that this picture that I'm using here, the difference between, this is a cartoon by the Naked Pastor. It says the difference between you and me, which is the Pharisees and Jesus, which way am I putting my head, is that you use the scripture to determine what love means, and I use love to determine what scripture means. And love is this moving part. It's dynamic. It's completely unwritten. There's no rules. There's no map. There's no boundaries to it. The boundaries come with God. But to get there, we need to have a sense of deep sense of inner boundaries, or deep sense of we need to make space for those boundaries that come from God. And if we impose our own boundaries there, we really are in danger of not receiving God's boundaries. Like Jesus, as Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's saying to his Father, he doesn't have a boundary. He doesn't say to his Father, well, you've told me to do this, so I'm going to go do it. He says, I don't want to do this, Father. Isn't there any other way? But your will, not mine, be done. So there's this sort of real interaction. We don't know what God's going to say, and it's okay to ask. So we have to keep that space open for our clients. Hopefully this is helpful.